Hello, folks. In this video, I'll discuss what is trust and how does it function in inclusive and equitable organizational settings. So as you move through this page, I would recommend taking it in the following order. Watch this video and then go to the assigned readings at the bottom of the page. Well, actually, watch this video, then read through the text below this video, then read the assigned readings at the bottom of the page, and then do questions 1 and 2 from the trust and conflict worksheet. So on this page, we're going to be exploring 2 concepts: relational trust and default trust. But before we do that, we have to ask this really, really big question, which is, what is a moral relationship? Now that might seem like a big, obvious, and kind of dumb question. A moral relationship is one where people do the right thing and they don't do the wrong thing. But to understand Margaret Urban Walker's argument, you have to understand that she contrasts a moral relationship from a coercive relationship or a moral or a trust-based relationship against a coercive or a power-based relationship. And in her view, here's a moral relationship. And I'm reading from page 23. Morality, as a phenomenon of human life, consists in trust-based relationships anchored on our expectations of one another that require us to take responsibility for what we do or fail to do, and that allow us to call on others to account for what they do or fail to do. This is a way of living by rules or norms that set mutual expectations and ground social practices of giving and demanding accounts. In this way of living, we rely on each other to be responsive to expectations and to understand that accounting is owed when we do not behave in ways upon which others rely. So there's this reliance, this need for cooperation is at the heart of morality in Margaret Urban Walker's view. And so to be moral is to say, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do so that others can rely on me, or I'm going to live in ways that follow our shared social rules so that others can rely on me. And I'm going to do that because I believe those expectations are legitimate, and also that they have a right to hold me accountable if I don't do what I am supposed to do, and that I have a right to hold them accountable. Now, what distinguishes that trust from coercion is that what's powerful, what is the driver there is that I do it just because I believe I have to take them seriously. Like, I should care that they're relying on me, and I should take them seriously because their judgment matters. Like, I honor that they have the dignity of people who can make value judgments about the way they want to live their lives and the kind of choices they want to make. And they're relying on me to be able to live their lives in that way. And I honor their agency, and I feel in some way accountable to it. Not because, and this is in contrast to power-based relationships, I'm not accountable to them because they can withhold my paycheck, or because they might not vote for me, or because they might be able to key my car, or they might hit me or physically mistreat me in some way. Those are all power-based relationships. And power really does shape how we treat each other and how we cooperate. But that's what distinguishes moral relationships, where what we do is driven by a sense that I have to be able to give an account to others, and I have to be able to justify what I have chosen to do, versus a power-based relationship where I'm like, I don't have to take their position seriously, but I'm going to motivate them through carrots and sticks. Now, not all coercive relationships or power-based relationships are inherently evil. They're more amoral. They're contract-based relationships. Even in contracts, it gets kind of muddy because we believe there's a moral obligation to fulfill our contracts also. But at the end of the day, it's about, is the relationship based on a sense of responsibility to each other that recognizes each other's dignity, or is the relationship based on the ability to coerce each other? Okay, so if that's a moral relationship, And trust is central. Trust is the thing that trust sort of rides on our ability to respect each other's dignity, but to rely on the fact that I'm going to honor the right that you have the right to hold me accountable. Okay, so those are moral relationships. And two different kinds of trust sustain two different kinds of moral relationships. So the first is relational-based trust. And in relational-based trust, basically, one person trusts another person to uphold some shared expectation. Maybe it's that they will pick them up from the airport. Maybe it's that they will speak kindly. Maybe it's that they will feed the cat. Whatever it is, they will do this thing, and that they will do it for the right reasons. Now, what constitutes a right reason is dependent on the actual example, but it's a specific relationship. I expect someone else to do something, uphold some sort of expectation, and I believe I can hold them accountable if they don't do it, and that they can hold me accountable if I don't do my things. Default trust is a lot more general, and I will turn your attention to the text under the video, which is where I try to tease apart what default trust is. I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to tell you where I've gone just a little beyond Margaret Urban Walker's definition of default trust. Okay, so this is my summary of her account. Default trust means roughly that people feel that they know the social expectations of the community they're operating in, that those social expectations are legitimate. They reflect some kind of important social value, that persons in the community can generally be relied upon to fulfill social expectations. And if somebody is harmed by another person's failure to meet legitimate expectations, the community will hold that person accountable, or at least acknowledge that a wrongdoing has happened. That's all generally consistent with Margaret Urban Walker's argument, except for that number two. I think she roughly thinks that, but it's complicated, and I won't get into. She thinks that there are times when default trust can be deformed, so that everybody shares the same expectation, and we're all relying on it, but the rules that we're playing by are inherently unfair. We're going to set that to the side for a moment, or not set it aside. We're gonna operate under ideal conditions, as if to have default trust is to be able to say, not just, I know what the rules are, but I think that the rules are fair. And furthermore, that if I don't think the rules are fair, people are going to honor my dignity enough to take me seriously when I say, this is not a good way of proceeding. The way we've set this system up is inherently unjust. So if we treat, which is what I think Margaret Urban Walker wants to say, but she also wants to make this other technical point that we're just going to sidestep. Okay, so the reason both kinds of trust are important is that what they allow for is humans to feel a sense of control in their world. Like, the world is very unpredictable. There are volcano eruptions and economic catastrophes and illness and sickness. We don't have a lot of control, but we can get a little bit more safety, a little bit more ability to make plans and have hopes and dreams and move toward those hopes and dreams if, amidst all the chaos of life, at least we can trust each other. And by contrast, if we can't trust each other at all, I can't trust that my mail is going to show up. I can't trust that my partner is going to be kind to me. I can't trust that my employer will pay me. I can't trust that I'm not going to be sexually harassed when I walk into the workplace. I can't trust that my work will be evaluated in ways that are fair. If I can't trust, then I live in perpetual anxiety and a sense of hyper defensiveness, and I can't ever just kind of relax into relationships. Instead, I have to constantly be thinking about, how do I get more power here? How do I acquire enough carrots and sticks that I can motivate people who do not care about me and will not respect my human dignity? How do I motivate them out of pure self-interest to do what I want them to do? But that requires so much hypervigilance all the time. And also, furthermore, we know it doesn't always work, right? We know that sometimes it doesn't matter how much money you have. You can't force somebody to recognize your dignity. And so that's why this is not what Margaret Urban Walker says. She offers an account of default trust. I believe that organizations that are just and equitable and inclusive are those that show high levels of default trust, insofar as people know what the rules are, they feel like those rules are fairly applied, they can rely on others because they know what the social expectations in various roles are, but they also feel like they can say, the way we've set this thing up is harmful to me in some way, and I would like to renegotiate it. That is a wildly unusual thing to happen in most workplaces. As a colleague of mine, Jill Craneshaw, she's the ombuds at Wake Forest University, and you may hear from her later in the semester. Her role, the ombuds exist in any organizational setting because people face all these situations where they think, oh, I have a problem with my manager, but if I say something, they're going to come after me. So I just need to just be quiet, just keep that one to myself. There's no way for me to resolve this problem because the person who's causing the problem has more power than me, and I just need to like keep my head down and keep my nose to the grindstone. That's not an inclusive organization. It's not inclusive of people's opinions, and therefore it can't lead to equitable distribution of social status or money or the other things that we might, or physical safety or advancement opportunities. Unless there's inclusivity in terms of moral accountability, then you can't have equitable distribution of any of the goods that an organization might produce. So we've covered a lot of ground there. What more do I want to say here? I think that's all I want to say here. Default trust is more general. It's a lot like social trust. Relational trust is specific, but they are both the foundation of moral relationships. And in our next video, we'll explore how trust commonly breaks down and how it can be restored in an organizational context.